Corey made it to the kitchen and glanced at the clock. People were already celebrating the New Year on the East Coast, where the majority of his family lived in Atlanta, which was the reason for all the phone calls he'd gotten. However, here in Montana, they had another 2 hours to go. He figured he might as well get an early start at celebrating, although he wasn't sure just how much celebrating he would do. All he saw looming ahead of him for the incoming year was 12 more months of loneliness. He would even discount the words of that gypsy woman a couple of months back at the county fair in Helena, who'd had the damn nerve to boldly predict that the new year would bring him total fulfillment. That was nothing but pure hogwash. Total fulfillment had stopped coming his way the day he'd seen Abby Madison for the last time. He had known the day Abby had married Larry Winters. He'd also known, with the help of a private investigator, that her parents had passed away some years back. And he knew that she'd given birth to a little girl she had named Madison. And according to what the investigator found out, the Winters were a happy family. It was only after receiving that report had he decided, since Abby had gotten on with her life, that he needed to get on with his. He had tried doing so several times, but had failed miserably. Maybe it was time he tried again. Moving with determination, he left the kitchen and went into his bedroom. Kneeling, he pulled out a box he kept underneath his bed that contained all his important papers. He opened the box and pulled out a thick envelope. It was the file he had on Abby that contained the investigator report, as well as pictures he and Abby had taken together years ago when they'd first met at Yellowstone National Park. Over the years, he would sit and go through the file, look at the pictures, and his heart would break all over again. Maybe it was time to put an end to 32 years of misery. It was time he realized once and for all that his mountain, Corey's mountain, would never be Corey and Abby's mountain. It was time for him to accept that Abby had adjusted to her marriage and probably even had grandchildren by now. He pulled in a deep breath, and his fingers tightened on the folder while he glanced across the room at the fire that was blazing in the fireplace. It would be so easy, and most logical, to toss the entire file in the fire and watch it burn. So why was he holding on to a past that would always be a past? Why did he continue to torture himself this way? He moved toward the fireplace and lifted his hand, but couldn't find the strength or willpower to toss anything in. Instead, he dropped down in the recliner in front of the fireplace, and as the clock moved slowly toward the midnight hour and the new year, he opened the file to reminisce, and to remember a time he just couldn't forget and let go. His mind took him back to that summer day at Yellowstone National Park, when he'd known that he had fallen in love with Abby Madison. "Excuse me, miss, but you aren't allowed to pet the gray wolf cubs." The young woman, who was crouched down petting the animal that was locked in a cage, turned toward Corey Westmoreland and gave him an apologetic smile. He felt a knot in the middle of his stomach when she turned those beautiful chocolate eyes on him, and he was immediately smitten. He had first seen her a few days ago, but this was the closest he'd been to her. All the other park rangers had been talking about the beautiful, proper-talking girl from Boston who had come to spend 2 weeks vacationing at Yellowstone National Park with her parents. When he'd seen her, he'd known the guys had been right. She was definitely a beauty. He had wanted to get close, but her parents' presence had all but made it impossible. They were definitely an overprotective pair. "Sorry," she said, standing. "I truly am. But the cub looked so lonely and scared. What will be done to him?" "We're going to try and find his parents. Somehow they got separated, and I'm sure his mother is pretty frantic by now." She smiled at hearing that. It was as if knowing the cub would be returned to its mother had taken a load off her mind. "How long have you been a park ranger?" she asked him. He glanced at his watch and then back at her. Luckily, he had time to spare, since it was the beginning of his lunch hour. "This is my first year. I'm a senior at Montana State University, and I work here part-time as part of my internship. I'm set to graduate in December." She made a face that he thought was beautiful, and then she said, "I wish that was me finishing college. I'm just heading off there in September. This trip was a graduation gift before starting college in the fall."